The idea of using nutrition to promote good health is nothing new. Indeed, Hippocrates, the ancient Greek father of Western medicine, said, "Let food be thy medicine," over 2,000 years ago. Yet it wasn't until more recently that the science behind this observation was systematically probed and applied. Two researchers who've made groundbreaking contributions to this effort are Dr. Colin Campbell and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. Born just a few months apart in 1933 and 34, they each grew up on farms. Campbell's childhood farm is in rural Virginia, where his family raised dairy cattle and milked cows.
My dad and mother moved here in 1943 when I was 9 years old. And during that time, we had a dairy of about somewhere between 20 and 30 cows, which in those days was a modest, medium-sized dairy.
At the time, milk was believed to be nature's perfect food. So perfect, in fact, that this U.S. government film from the early 20th century recommended that infants who have just been weaned from their mother's milk should be switched immediately to cow's milk.
That was the excitement of doing something, producing nature's perfect food, if you will.
Established in 1675, the Esselstyn's farm is in upstate New York. On these rolling hillsides, they grazed both beef and dairy cattle.
This was sort of like the nerve center of the operation in a way?
More or less, absolutely. This is sort of the epicenter around these barns. This is the way farming was done in that area.
And so this is sort of where you learned the craft of the trade of farming. How old were you when you moved here again?
7. I didn't start driving the tractor till I was 8 years old.
Well, a late bloomer, right?
Exactly. But I enjoyed it, and I really got a great kick out of doing the farm work.
Although they didn't know each other yet, farm life had a deep and lasting influence on both Campbell and Esselstyn.
To make it successful, you had to have persistence, staying power, and tenacity of purpose.
I guess it's ironic in the sense that we're both now advocating, not consuming the products that we were busy actually producing with our families.
During Campbell and Esselstyn's lifetimes, the American diet has changed dramatically. Near the beginning of the 20th century, Americans each ate about 120 pounds of meat annually. By 2007, that figure had exploded to no less than 222 pounds. In 1913, we ate about 40 pounds of processed sugar each per year. However, by 1999, our consumption of all refined sweeteners had risen to over 147 pounds. In 1909, Americans consumed around 294 pounds of dairy products apiece. But by 2006, our yearly intake of dairy had more than doubled to 605 pounds. By the early 1950s, Campbell was off to college at Penn State, while Esselstyn went to Yale. As part of Yale's rowing team, Esselstyn won an Olympic gold medal in 1956. During this same decade, the pace of American life was accelerating, even with our food. The late 50s was the heyday of the drive-in burger joint. The supermarket was just beginning to thrive in the newly built post-World War II suburbs. This was when the so-called convenience foods were born, like the legendary foil-wrapped TV dinner, not to mention a host of other tasty processed delicacies devised to make our lives easier and better. By now, Colin Campbell was in graduate school at Cornell University, which had one of the most prestigious nutritional science departments in the country. His research was on animal nutrition and biochemistry.
But it was focused more on feeding animals for their ability to be able to produce meat, milk, and eggs, protein containing. And so my own research was focused on protein, making sure we got enough. It was considered to be the vital nutrient. It was one of the first nutrients discovered. And without protein, the animal would die. So it was a life force. And in fact, in even the early 1900s, there were statements made that this is the stuff of civilization itself.
Protein was also nearly synonymous with animal-based foods like meat. It still is today, all over America.
Why do you think meat is important in our diet?
Protein. Protein.
Protein.
A lot of protein.
We need protein, don't we? We can't live without protein.
The idea that plants had protein also didn't come into play until maybe the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then it struggled through the years.
No matter what source the protein came from, in the late 1950s, most scientists believed the world needed a lot more of it.
We had a lot of starving and malnourished children in the world. And so in my community, the nutrition community, there were discussions about why so, what could be done. And one of the prominent thoughts was to make sure they get enough protein. I certainly went along with this view.
At about the same time, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn was just beginning his medical career at the world-famous Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. Surgery soon became his specialty.
There's something awfully satisfying about if you can remove the disease. For instance, if a patient had gallstones, you could remove them. If it was a gastric ulcer or a stomach ulcer, you'd directly take care of that. If it's a hernia, the same thing.
During the 1960s, heart disease was on the rise in the U.S. What doctors commonly call coronary artery disease is usually caused by a condition of the arteries that supply the heart with blood. What happens is that over time, a fatty substance in the bloodstream called cholesterol builds up in the coronary arteries, restricting the blood flow to the heart. This can ultimately cause several problems, from severe chest pain called angina to heart attacks. Cholesterol is a natural substance produced by all animals, including humans, and it's an essential component of our cells' walls. But when we consume dietary cholesterol, which is only found in animal foods like meat, eggs, and dairy products, it tends to stay in the bloodstream. This so-called plaque is what collects on the inside of our blood vessels and is the major cause of coronary artery disease. In the late 1960s, a colleague of Dr. Esselstyn's at the Cleveland Clinic made a major breakthrough in the treatment of this condition. In fact, Esselstyn shared space with him in the clinic's surgical locker room. His name was Dr. Rene Favallaro.
Rene really sparkled in the operating room, and in 1967 he did his first bypass graft at the clinic, coronary artery bypass graft.
This revolutionary new procedure was accomplished by removing a vein from the patient's leg, then stitching it on the heart's blocked coronary artery to allow the blood to flow around or bypass the blockage. Today, over 500,000 Americans go under the knife annually for heart bypass surgery, costing around $100,000 apiece. These operations alone constitute a staggering total of nearly $50 billion.